All right, thank you, Tommaso. First, I'd like to just thank the sponsors and the organizers and the panelists and the speakers. I mean, day one was a really successful program, and we're just really at the beginning of day two. So we look forward to some great panelist discussions. So before I jump into kind of talking about the Next G Alliance, I just want to acknowledge there were a number of references made during day one discussions, and just from a few of the Next G Alliance leaders, a few things I noted. You know, Andre Fuchs from AT&T, who's the chair of the Next G Alliance full members group, you know, made the comment. I paraphrase. You know, every company has their own 6G vision and business plans, 6G view of 6G trends, products and services, but it's really kind of this collective impact of the alliance. You know, collaborating with government, industry, and academia that will move the needle in terms of leadership. There was also some discussion during the value proposition segment with Jeremy Nasser from Verizon, where Jeremy talked about the fact that you know, we absolutely need a focus on the 6G marketplace in North America, but also understanding that everything we're doing is part of this global ecosystem. And then finally, Andy Thiessen from MITRE during the government role discussion, you know, talked about the Next G Alliance not being a standard development organization influencing standards, but really dealing with a lot of the spectrum needs issues, spectrum sharing, spectrum management perspectives that have to really be solved in the same kind of timeframes as standards. So these are all kind of really good opening comments and tied well into our discussion. So this morning, I'd like to talk about the Next G Alliance, and not only the structure and what we've been working on since launching all the working groups a few months ago, but also the approach. You know, why is this the right approach for this region of the globe? Why would this help promote leadership as we move toward the, you know, kind of the full vision of 6G throughout this decade? So let me jump into, if we could move to the next slide. I just want to make kind of a brief mention. I realize many of you know Addis, some of you may not know Addis. You know, Addis has for several decades been a leading standard development organization. You may also know us as the 3GPP North American organizational partner through all the various generations of mobile technology. So this is how companies in North America or government engages and participates and contributes to 3GPP in the development of the mobile specifications, but there's much more that we do. And so I want to make two key points. The first is one of our real focuses is really on advancing ICT industry transformation, and that you know, that transformation is not just happening in this very kind of narrow communications path in the industry, but it's really this industry kind of focusing outward into all the adjoining industries. And so we see more and more of how the information communication sector is, you know, impacting and being impacted by, you know, a number of industries, traditional industries, but also if you think about industries now like telehealth and smart agriculture, smart factories, and so on. So it's very much that kind of transformative path of the industry right now. And then the other point I'll make is that, you know, you cannot really look at 6G or 5G for that matter in isolation. It's really so much related to all these other areas around, you know, security and privacy and all the markets that encircle communications right now. So it's really kind of bringing this wealth of knowledge. And so this is one of the reasons why Addis launched the 6G, the Next G Alliance to address 6G. And this has really been one of our most ambitious projects so far. So I'll go through now and discuss in more detail kind of the motivation and how we're organized and where our main focus areas are and where we're going next. Next slide, please. So really going back to about 16, 18 months ago, the Addis board of directors, you know, in a very visionary manner, undertook discussions around how do we create North American leadership for 6G many years in advance. You know, how do we bring industry and government and academia together on this? And this led really to a call to action, which allowed us to really kind of approach government at a senior level and talk about kind of this thought process and where we want to go next in terms of alliance. And I guess the resounding response we received back, and this is in the 2020 timeframe, was this is exactly the right time to launch this. This should be stood up by the private sector, launched, go out and create your partners, develop the mission, develop the working structure, and so on, with the full knowledge that we would certainly be re-engaging government as the alliance unfolded, and we began to get deep into the work stream. So that was kind of the first touch point with government. We then took that feedback and the feedback from our members and put together the construct of an alliance. And again, throughout this process, the concept of it being a private sector led initiative, remains. The real goal was to really influence actions in government with, and also the 6G research communities. This has a very action-oriented agenda. So, while we're creating documents and we're creating reports, and that's a natural way to convey recommendations and so on. The real goal is not to stop, with the development of documents, but really to focus in on driving outcomes, and the concept that, from the standpoint of industry and government and academia, we're all in this together in terms of trying to drive North American leadership. We've really grown from initially 16 founding members going back to the end of last year to over 75 members now, and we continue to get inquiries. We continue to add new members. I can provide some more detail on that as we go through the discussion. We have really grown, not only in terms of just commitment on paper, but really commitment of resources from our members. We're well over 500. Actually, we're getting ready to eclipse 600 participants right now, experts that are really meeting on almost a daily basis across all these various work groups, and providing their thoughts, their insight, their contributions, and helping us to shape a really important outcome. So let me come down maybe one more layer now, if we can go to the next slide, please. So the question is, what are the basic foundational goals for the Alliance? And so while we have many goals, I think there are really kind of three key areas. The first is the belief that Next G really needs to kind of rise up to a national agenda level. And the reason we're saying that is because Next G is not just about, faster, better communications. As we've seen over the last year or two, the whole communications information infrastructure has been so key to the continued economic stability of the country, of this region, and we see that even happening more so as we move ahead. That 6G will really find itself in so many industries and verticals and enterprises and consumer business units that it's really key to the continued growth at a national level. And I guess I'll make one clarification in terms of Next G. The often question is, well, what is the definition of Next G? We've really defined it as 6G and beyond, kind of end of decade vision. But we also understand that 5G has a very long evolutionary path, and there's going to be great advancements made, throughout this decade. And so 6G is not kind of a remove and replace view. It's really building on the accomplishments and successes of 5G, and it will be be very much dependent on many of the things we learn throughout the deployment cycle of 5G. The second area is really adopting a view that works in this region. Obviously, everyone's aware of what's happening right now, in Asia, in China, in terms of building a strategy around manufacturing technology and standards dominance. Japan, of course, is doing a lot of funding right now of the private sector to develop 6G research. Korea, major investments and making big promises in terms of market availability of 6G during this decade. And of course, within the EU, we have numerous projects like Horizon, Hexa-X, 6G flagship, and so on. They're looking at research platforms. But the real question is, what makes sense for this region, considering our values, our economic structure, our political structure, our policies, individual markets, within this region. So that was the real focus, to develop a model that works within this region. And finally, all this has to lead up to really a 6G marketplace And that marketplace is obviously deploying in this region, but it's also looking at basically selling into the global market. So these are kind of underpinning foundational goals that we have discussed throughout the formation and have carried through the working activities. Next slide, please. So talking about this very quickly, this is a really important slide in terms of approach. I mentioned talking about the approach, and I think this is basically the view of how in North America we can win. And the view is that basically the Next G Alliance was put together to develop the strategies and the priorities, recommendations, do the deep analysis, come back to government, funding agencies, research communities with a collective view of what are the big technology drivers, what are the big technology development areas where we need to invest, what are government action recommendations coming from the private sector. So it's really kind of working alongside government to create a very holistic approach, but the continuum along the bottom is really critical. And we think this is where we differentiate ourselves from what's happening in other parts of the globe. We're really see the need to tie together what's happening in the area of research with what comes next in terms of developing solutions, developing products, onshore manufacturing, incentivizing the manufacturing community in that respect. Standards leadership, not standards development, but that'll take its own course, but standards leadership in terms of making sure that North American requirements and needs make their way through the process. And then this all really points to areas of Next G readiness and commercializing technology. The real key here is that all these things have to really tie together. These are independent activities. And so you could easily see how something like in the area of research, important research area, applied research areas, could give us an 8-year glimpse into what would be the job skills of the future. What would be the skill sets, which then kind of ties back to education, academics. So this is kind of holistically where the approach that Next G Alliance has adopted, and we have discussed with government, we discussed with all of our partners, of course, and this is what we believe in the end will provide leadership. Next slide. Want to just briefly talk about the members who have now grown to over, the full membership has grown to over 40, and what you see are companies that build networks, companies that develop the infrastructure, develop the devices, develop the software. You see many specialized companies, you see companies in the testing area, and you see other companies that don't always traditionally participate in these collaborative activities. So we're very pleased with the full membership growth. We feel like we really have kind of hit the market at exactly the right time, even maybe a beat or two ahead of the kind of the 6G perspective. And so we certainly plan to continue to grow our full membership and depend on them for our strategy and guidance. Next slide. I also want to mention contributing members, which are obviously just as important as our full members, but these are companies that perhaps have more specialized business missions, companies that are in the research area, research labs, research institutions, and very importantly, we've had a number of academic institutions join us, many who are both sponsoring, participating in this symposium. They are really bringing a great deal of thought leadership to the development of the various work streams within the Alliance. We expect to continue to grow. And as we get into areas to go beyond some of our initial kind of paper documents, this would be very important in terms of validating our conclusions, our recommendations, and developing what comes next. And I'll make one other comment before we move on. Some recent news, the full member group has just approved a new class of government membership to the Alliance. So we have a very, in the coming weeks, a very coordinated program now to reach out to government agencies and allow government to contribute their needs, their requirements, their perspectives to what we're developing within the Alliance. And we feel that will really kind of create the final linkage to really a strong collaboration between industry, academia, and government. Next slide. Of course, a good good, strong alliance needs strong leadership. And so Andre and Jan have been at the helm since day one of the alliance. In fact, as they were present during all the original development of the whole strategy and formation of the alliance. So we're very appreciative to their leadership. Also, the steering of leadership, which basically owns all the deliverables and work products and so on, is very important to us to have kind of balanced leadership across kind of the vendors, the infrastructure vendors, the operators, and the very importantly, the hyperscalers. And that also kind of represents our general membership. All these individuals have brought strong leadership and perspectives to what we're doing and have kept us on course in terms of our original mission. So we're very thankful for that. Next slide. And I guess one final kind of key point in terms of our structure is, given the complexity, we have, if you combine all of our working groups and committees and leadership committees and so on, we got almost a dozen activities. We've got, hundreds of participants. It was really important to Addis to have a technical program office to make sure that we deliver on our commitments, that we tie all the various activities together across this very large set of resources and work activities. So we're very pleased. We selected Virginia Tech Applied Research Corporation back in the June timeframe to run the technical program office. I think many of you probably know Eric, through his days at the White House and the FCC and in industry and now back in academia. But along with that, VTR brings a very strong leadership team that has a great deal of experience in terms of strategic programs, operational programs, and so on. So again, I think that kind of closes the loop in terms of having a kind of a well thought out and orchestrated process, not just for this year, but for going forward. Next slide. Okay, I want to just kind of pivot toward the end of the remarks to kind of where we're focused this year. And one of our commitments has been to deliver on a vision and roadmap by end of year for publishing at the beginning of 2022. And so we've adopted a kind of this multi-layered approach to 6G vision. And I wouldn't necessarily call this bottom up. I wouldn't necessarily call it top down. I think what we view is that there are a number of layers, and given that this has such a diverse audience, we really felt it was important that we relate the results in terms of these various layers of understanding. So at the national imperatives level, there's kind of this view of the kind of the big economic drivers, societal drivers, policies, government needs, things that are very kind of at a very regional, national level. So you can think of things like, closing digital divide, digital equity, energy sustainability, privacy, economic competitiveness. These are kind of the big national imperatives that should kind of be kind of overarching how we look at this future vision. And then there's a layer that basically looks at applications and markets. What will be the markets that will be really relevant if we take a end of the decade view in terms of dependency on 6G or being enabled by 6G. And then you begin to think of all the application classes, not necessarily down to kind of the killer app or kind of predicting a small number of use cases, but taking a very kind of broad view of the applications that are going to span kind of holographic services, digital twin, digital replica, ultra high positioning applications, multi-sensory applications. So this is where the innovation comes. This is where development comes at a central layer. And then of course, for the technologist, the technology development section, which if you start to kind of decompose all the various technologies that will touch 6G, our technology team has already kind of identified 50 key areas that they're starting to dig into that touch upon, not only radio systems, but also the devices, the subcomponents, kind of the basic things that are underlying the networks, how networks will be changing, the concepts of distributed cloud, native cloud, cloud compute. So this is kind of our structure. The idea is to communicate the vision across these different layers, and really allow whoever the audience is at whatever level to have a good understanding of the vision, where this is going, and to create all the connections between each layer of this vision. Next slide. So I want to just kind of give a glimpse into the roadmap of the national 6G view right now, and that is really kind of what ties together where we are today to where we want to go in terms of a very robust 6G marketplace. And so up front in this process, as it should be, are kind of all the key drivers we just talked about, the things that will basically be driving the market. And then you build on top of that, all the government actions and policies and recommendations. What are the basic needs across the organization? What are the core technology and applications? All these things will eventually kind of spin up and move closer to some of the market readiness concerns and things like operational needs. So the idea is basically take us from where we are today to this vision that we create around the 6G marketplace with an action-oriented agenda of what needs to happen in what time frame and what priority. And that's really kind of the whole basis of the roadmap itself and what we plan to deliver early in 2022. All right, next slide. So just kind of finishing up, just to give you a sense of the structure. We've got these working activities that are going on. Again, I mentioned the National 6G Roadmap Group is kind of a foundational point for integrating outputs from many of these groups. But just as important are, at the front end of this process are the societal economic needs group, the drivers, the application drivers that are part of this, the Green G group that's developing sustainability recommendations. They'll be producing a white paper in the coming weeks. And then we have kind of the deep technology development, and we have the spectrum group, which of course is looking at things from in terms of positioning spectrum to be market ready, and the amount of time it takes for those things to happen within the industry, within government, and so on. So that gives you a kind of a snapshot of what's happening within the Alliance. We can go to the last slide. I just want to finish up and thank everyone. If you'd like any additional information, you can certainly go to the Next G Alliance website. You can contact me directly. We would very much like to welcome new members to this approach. We expect to continue growing the organization and growing the program as we move ahead. Thank you, and back to Doug.
Okay, thank you, Mike. There were a number of questions. I don't know if you had the chance to see them. We can probably have time for just one of them if you'd like to maybe take a crack at that. Would that be okay?
Sure.
For instance, the one question which got the most likes, I think that's why we should do this, right, is really, and I think you have touched on this a bit, just as when we think of a generation of cellular, we often think about 3GPP standards bodies and the evolution of waveforms, but how should we be thinking about 6G and the breadth of 6G? And I think you did touch on that, but maybe since it got so many likes, you could just elaborate on that a bit.
Okay. I think we're taking a much broader view. I mean, 3GP has a certain context, and because of the way standards are done very sequentially, very systematically, there are releases and there are generations and so on. But we're taking a much broader view of this is really an end of decade view, more of an aspirational view. What do we want the vision of 6G to do? What do we want this to look like? So it gets beyond simply specifying requirements for mobile technology. It's a much broader view across all the adjoining industries and how this will impact society, how it will impact government, the economy, innovation in general. I hope that answers the question.